Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Hi, welcome to Photoville 2020 and today's conversation with the winners of the 2020 Zeke Award by Social Documentary Network with Kristen Emack, Jason Houston, and Nicoló Filippo Rosso and Glenn Ruger of Social Documentary Network. My name is Laura Romanis. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Photoville. We're a small nonprofit here in Brooklyn focused on community and education through photographic public art and providing more platform for visual storytellers. We recently just kicked off our 9th annual festival with over 60 exhibitions that are not only displayed here in Brooklyn Bridge Park, but in all 5 boroughs of the city of New York, from Staten Island to Times Square, the Bronx, Queens, and Harlem. We decided that just because we couldn't have our beloved shipping containers didn't mean we couldn't exhibit work for the public and make it even more accessible than ever before. And talk about accessible, we've made all of our programs online so everyone can experience it. So this is one of the many talks we'll be presenting this year over the next 3 weeks. And I want to thank our amazing partners at PhotoWIngs for their continued support of this program. We'll also be recording it because of PhotoWIngs and also the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation. This weekend will be really fantastic. So check out our website, photoville.nyc, to see all the entire schedule. I also want to shout out our marquee partners for making the entire festival happen: Brooklyn Bridge Park, NYC Parks, Leica Camera, PhotoWIngs, the NYC Mayor's Office of Media Entertainment, New York Ferry, and the Dumbo Business Improvement District. So now to the Social Documentary Network. We're really proud. We've been partnering with Glenn and his team for quite a while. We're so proud to be showing the actual winners of this year's in Brooklyn Bridge Park. We're on Pier 3. It's absolutely beautiful. I actually just rode over there about an hour ago. There's so many people in the park and so many different people experiencing these stories. So to learn more about these stories and the photographers who told them, I'm going to pass this over to Glenn Ruger. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And I really want to thank you and the entire Photoville family for pulling this off and congratulate you doing this under COVID conditions this year. You managed to achieve something that's not a compromise. It's a new way to envision experiencing photography and programming, and you're probably reaching more people this year than you would have in shipping containers and in conference rooms in Dumbo. And I'm sure there might be some interesting discussions after this year as to how to do this in following years. Yep. Because of what you've learned.
Yep,
definitely. And I really want to say we very much appreciate Photoville inviting SDN and Zeke to present the winners of the Zeke Award during the last 2 years. I also want to thank 2 of our sponsors who have made the Zeke Award possible: Canson Infinity and Digital Silver Imaging. Thank you to both of our sponsors. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. I'm sure there are people from all over the country and all over the world with us here, but here in Massachusetts and in New York, it's a beautiful fall day, beckoning us to be outside. So really, thank you for coming inside on Sunday to be with us here. One comment before we get started: the website says that this event will go to 3 o'clock. We're actually going to go a little bit over. We're definitely going to go to at least 3:15 and maybe a few minutes over if we need some additional time. And I'm so honored to have with us today 3 winners of the Zeke Award for documentary photography. This is the 2nd year we've presented this award, and one of the biggest benefits of the award for the photographers is to have their work presented in Photoville. And if you're in the New York area, I hope you could come on down to Pier 3 and see our banner. And if you do visit, keep safe, wear a mask, and keep your distance. I hear there's a lot of people out there. It's a beautiful day in New York today. The other benefit of the Zeke Award is for photographers to have their work featured in Zeke magazine. And this just came off the presses this week. We feature the winner of the Zeke Awards in this. On the cover, actually, it's a photo from the Juneteenth rally in New York this year, but on the inside, we feature Jason's work, Kristen's work, and honorable mentions. We also have sections on Black Lives Matter photography from demonstrations around the country. And we have a special section on pandemic in focus. So if you'd like to get your hands on a printed copy of Zeke magazine, just visit visit our website at zekemagazine.com. And today we have with us Jason Houston, Kristen Emack, and Nicoló Filippo Rosso. We'll talk about their winning projects and thoughts on doing documentary photography today. And after each has presented their work, we'll open this up with a Q&A with you, the audience. Our first presenter today is Jason Houston. We'll talk about his project, Last Wildest Place, an investigation into indigenous communities in one of the most remote, inaccessible, and important areas of the Peruvian Amazon, and their struggle with encroaching deforestation, logging, mining, oil and gas development, agricultural expansion, and both legal and illegal road construction. Jason was introduced to the Amazon region in 2015 as part of a team from Science magazine, investigating the possible causes for a dramatic increase in contacts between isolated tribes and remote villagers. He has since returned a dozen times with the Upper Amazon Conservancy and other organizations to try to better understand the tenuous relationship between isolated tribes and settled indigenous communities. And Jason has partnered with many organizations, including the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, UNESCO, USAID, and the Pulitzer Center on projects ranging from wildland firefighting in the American West and maternal health care in Haiti and Nepal, to small-scale fisheries throughout the developing tropics. He's a senior fellow at the International League of Conservation Photographers and a fellow at Wake Forest University's Center for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. Okay, Jason.
Thanks, Glenn. So Last Wildest Place takes place in the Peruvian Amazon in southeastern Peru. The Amazon as a whole, most of us know, is one of the most important ecosystems on the planet. It's over 1 billion acres, which is larger than the next 2 tropical rainforests combined. It houses somewhere around an estimated 30% of terrestrial species. It produces 20% of the world's oxygen and fresh water. And for climate regulation, it obviously regulates, all of the Western Hemisphere, which means it also is regulating climate around the world. And it's a massive, massive carbon storage sink. So one of the most important large regions on the planet. And then the Peru-Manu region, where this project takes place, is one of the largest and most remote, still undeveloped parts of the Amazon. Brazil has the most Amazon forest within its boundaries, but this area in southeastern Peru is actually one of the largest untouched areas. It's about 25 million acres, about twice the size of Costa Rica. And it's also home to perhaps the largest concentration of isolated tribal people on the planet. So communities that since the late 1800s and the atrocities of the rubber boom throughout the Amazon, and as a result of all of that development, decided to retreat into the forest and stay out of contact with the Western world. And so there's a bunch of tribal communities living in Peru and Ecuador and Colombia down there, and Brazil, that live in complete isolation. And as Glenn said, I was introduced to this project in 2015 through the assignment with Science magazine, and then spent, since then, have been back a dozen times working on a variety of projects. And Last Wildest Place is sort of a more personal interpretation and attempt to share the experiences that I so fell in love with, and to pull out from all of the NGO work that I was doing down there and find that sort of more personal approach to it. And so the projects that have gone into this have included looking at illegal logging and road building. And road building in tropical forests like this tends to be about the worst thing that can happen for a forest, because it opens up it opens the region up for all the other extractive industries. I've done work with the illegal gold mining and Peru's crackdown on illegal gold mining. And then also most recently, we were working on these new narco invasions. So farmers coming down from the foothills of the Andes and moving into the more remote areas of the basin to grow coca for the drug trade. So I'll share a few photographs and give a little bit more of an intro here. Okay. That share look good, Glenn? Am I good?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, awesome. So this area, there's the Peru-Manu complex holds two of the largest national parks in Peru. The Manu National Park, which is considered one of the most biodiverse places on the entire planet, and then the Alto Purus National Park, which is contiguous with Manu and is the largest national park in Peru. Most of these areas are completely restricted to travel, so we work around the perimeter, and all travel is by boat. Obviously, we're on rivers like this. The rivers are defined, distance on the rivers is defined by the number of curves and not distance, because you could see if you could take a kilometer to go 100 yards depending on how the river turns. And this area is threatened by the full range of the traditional deforestation drivers, everything from logging and agriculture to road building and everything else. As I mentioned, one of the most recent projects we're working on was these new farms popping up in these remote upper watersheds from farmers that are moving in to grow coca. And so they're moving up. This is a family moving upstream. They build farms like this along the side of the river, and these farms are to grow traditional staples like yucca or plantains or corn, whatever. And then these farms become a front for bringing in all of the agricultural equipment that is used to grow coca deeper in the forest. So this is a family moving into this region. And this is a farmer on a newly established farm. And they all sort of have, stories and explanations for how this land grab is working, but the land grabs are actually entirely illegal. You have some logging concessions and things like that then get illegally transferred into these sort of false agricultural entities, and then and everything. We did a story for Manga Bay on this, and you can, I don't have the link here to share, but if you wanted to Google Coca Peru and Manga Bay, it would come up and you could see the story that we did recently. Logging, traditional impact to the area. A few days before this photograph was made, there was about 4 million board feet of illegal tropical hardwoods confiscated in the port city of Pucallpa, which is on the Ucayali River, and that's where a lot of the logs and everything else that comes out of the forest is coming out of.
Jason, what makes something illegal?
There's mostly it's mahogany. That tends to be the one that, and Spanish cedar, the two that are the illegally logged woods. There's heavy restrictions on how much of that can be logged, and in some cases, none of it should be logged. And what happens is people go into an area, they have a logging concession, they pull out mahogany or Spanish cedar illegally, they cut down a bunch of other trees to so that they have trees that were cut, and then they burn those trees and then ship the mahogany out. So you actually get, so they're using legal trees to go in to harvest illegal trees, and then in order to get rid of the legal trees so that they can pull out the illegal logs, they're actually burning those. So you get double deforestation as well, which is really tragic. Mm. Yeah, so it's just that these rare hardwoods are heavily regulated. This area is on the southern side of the complex. This is fluvial gold mining. It's about 40,000 hectares of completely devastated tropical forest, and all of this is illegal. So basically they're going in, they're cutting the trees, they liquefy the soil, and then that soil is processed over and over and over again to get all of the gold, the gold dust and stuff out of there. an unfortunate result of that is that the soil has no biological matter left in it. So it's really hard for that to actually come back. And one of the groups I was working with was looking at different ways of how to reforest some of these massive illegally mined areas. Mercury contamination is also a big issue with that. That is a jaguar skin. I could have bought it for about $300. Obviously also a totally illegal commodity. And so, you know, one of the things we're doing most when we're working there is we're working with the local communities. And these local communities sort of live on a spectrum from the isolated tribal people that I talked about to the to more settled but still very remote indigenous communities, to these little outpost towns and cities that are the port in and out of these most remote areas. So this young girl was part of a group that was contacted in the 90s by loggers and sort of brought into an indentured servitude type relationship working with the logging camps, and then has they've since settled nearby one of these large port towns. So they're considered an initial contact, which means that they are not fully assimilated into Western culture, and still learning how to interact with the outside world, but are in contact with the outside world and no longer truly isolated. And these stories run really deep. I mentioned that the atrocities of the rubber boom in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and there was so basically rubber for the wars, for making tires for airplanes, and all of that became a super important thing for the global economy. And the victims of that were the communities that lived in these areas in South America where rubber trees grew. She was telling me a story about how her parents were enslaved enslaved and forced to work collecting some these plant toxins that are used in agricultural herbicides or pesticides. And these, so where we come in and out of, we have these big port cities that we drop in and out of. All travel in is by airplane, and then once you get in, and it's usually chartered flights. Sometimes we're even hitching rides with the missionary planes or government planes. And then once you get into these port towns, there's these little hubs of commerce, but then also they are the launching point for getting in the motorized dugouts that we go upriver in. And this boy has these, it's kind of like henna tattoos. It's huito in this case, which is the black that's made from some jungle fruits, and it's a black like temporary tattoo, lasts for a couple weeks. And each of the different tribes and villages have different markings and different ways of, and different things that their body tattoos mean. Okay. All right, I can hand that off, Glenn.
All right, thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
And if you'd like to see Jason's photographs larger, please visit his banner or the Zeke Award banner down on Pier 3. Before we go to the next speaker, I'd just like to comment on questions. That we'll be taking questions at the very end through the raising your hand button. And we'll go over that in detail, but it's accessed through the participant button at the bottom of your Zoom channel. But feel free to use the chat. Feel free to chat among yourselves and us and make comments. And let us know where you're Zooming from in the chat. But we won't be using the chat directly for questions. We'll be using the raise their hand function later. Okay, our next presenter is Kristen Emack. We'll talk about her project Cousins, a story about the photographer's daughter and 3 nieces and their intimate and spiritual knowledge that is both ordinary and extraordinary. Kristen is a photographer and public school educator who lives and works in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and holds a degree in Latin American and Caribbean studies. She's a Mass Cultural Council Photography Fellow and is a Critical Mass Top 50 winner, a PDN Emerging 30 nominee, and her images are on the Photoville's fence for the second time. Kristen's work includes 2 ongoing projects that looks at childhood, family, and visibility, and a finished series that looks at loss. Okay, Kristen.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Thank you so much. And I wanted to thank you, Glenn, and all of Social Documentary Net, Photoville, and especially Photoville for being so creative at this time during a pandemic. To be able to pull this off is really amazing. And I'm so appreciative. And I wanted to also just shout out all of the jurors, because this whole experience has been just astounding. I mean, I really just cannot believe that I won, and I cannot believe that I'm in Photoville, even if it's virtual for me right now. And I also wanted to say thank you and welcome to all the friends and strangers who are Zooming with Nico and Jason and I today. And I'm sort of secretly glad that I can't actually see who's on there yet, and I'll just find out later who tuned in and who didn't, because it'll be maybe too nervous if I see the little faces on the little Zoom grid. So I'm gonna see if I can share my screen without technical difficulty. Got it, Glenn? Is that good?
Yeah, that looks perfect.
Great, thank you. Okay, so my work is really different than Nico and Jason's, because I'm working with people that I know extremely well. Have been documenting my daughter, and originally just two of my nieces, but now the third is also folded into the series. So clearly I'm close to these children because they're family, but I mean, we are so close that I was at each one of their births, and was realizing the other day that the very first photograph that was ever taken of any of these children I took. And I thought that was really kind of fun to think that at the time, I would never have imagined that I'd be photographing them so seriously over so many years. And I would always preface the work by saying that even though the work now, when I speak about it and when the girls and I talk about it, there is an element of it that's about representation, because of the lack of positive representation of children of color, of Black girls in particular. But the work didn't start there. The work started because I was spending all of my time with my daughter and the youngest children in the family, and we were having all sorts of adventures, and I had my camera with me, and I was doing what photographers do and started to photograph them before I had the idea that, or the notion that this was starting to gel into a series, or it was starting to, by putting the images together, was starting to have like a bigger story, a bigger narrative than I had originally intended. And then eventually, the girls started to get older. We started to have more conversations about race, representation, their personal experiences in the world, their experiences being out in the world with me versus being out in the world with other members of their family. And, they themselves started to realize that there's like this huge lack of images of Black girls out in the world just growing up in an everyday childhood. So as the work was developing, we really, honed our narrative around recognizing that this was important. And also that kind of also grew out of seeing how people responded to the images when the images were out in the world, particularly how white viewers were responding to the work. Because the comments were things like, oh my God, I've never seen pictures of Black people in bathing suits, really, it might sound like, it might sound very shocking to hear that, but this really was an experience that when people were interacting with the work who don't have mixed race families, don't necessarily have a lot of Black friends, or have people of color in their lives, white viewers were having a reaction and interfacing with the work in this way that was not shocking, but changing the way that they were thinking about things. So the work I have on my site, it's not in chronological order. So I'm just going to go through and tell you a little bit about each image. This image was taken, it's called Braids, and this one has been floating around in the world a lot. It's getting a lot of recognition. And the story that I like to tell about this one is that I'm not the kind of photographer that typically has my camera on me at all times, but I decided that I wanted to be that kind of photographer. So it was around New Year's, and I thought, I'm gonna try to become this kind of photographer. So I'm gonna bring my camera with me wherever I go. And we had to run out and get some food for I think we're having a big family dinner, and we didn't have something. So we were like, ran out to go run this errand. And the girls were, were together like this, just a little bit far away from me. And I just pulled out the camera and snapped that. And I knew at the moment, it was the kind of photographic moment where I knew that something magic had happened and that I had captured it. So it was an exciting moment. And I wish I could say that it inspired me to always have my camera with me, but I'm still not that photographer. So I've got a lot of love and admiration for the people who always have their camera on them. This image is called Forsythia. And again, one of the ways that I'm different from Jason and Nico is that like I literally am documenting in my backyard. This image is in the backyard. I live in Cambridge, Mass. And several of the images that we have are specifically local to Cambridge, to either my niece's home or my home. And some of the other images take place in the backyards of the places that I grew up in, my childhood home. To me, one of the reasons that this particular image is a standout and resonates with me is that this was one of the first images where my oldest niece, clearly the tallest one here, had really grown. She had grown in height and taller and larger than the other girls, but she had really also grown in maturity. And to me, this picture, she's just such a goddess here. And it just showed that there was, at some point, she went into this different realm than the other girls had. And they were still more in this like innocent childhood space. This one is called Milk Mustache. Some of the images are candid. Some of them are, they're not quite set up or orchestrated, but there might be a moment where I ask the girls to hold that or just stand still for a second. They weren't even aware that I had the camera. This is in my daughter's bedroom. This was at the Mass a year after their grandfather had passed. And this is one of the images that's on the banner under the Brooklyn Bridge, and helped me to win the Zeke Award. What is mostly significant about this image for me right now is that it was the very last image that we took before quarantine. So it was maybe like a week or maybe 2 weeks out before everything shut down. And then I lost access to my nieces for several months. So that, the series really had to take a pause. And I just think of this moment and think like none of us knew what was coming. This image also was taken in Cambridge, Mass. This is called Piggyback, another image that took place in my backyard. And one of the things that we've noticed a lot is that so many of our pictures are by the water. In fact, it was somebody on Instagram who noticed that so many of my images were by the water. And I think that's what sort of, I hadn't really thought of that. And it sparked the conversation with the girls and I. And I'm just going to take you through a few more. This image in particular, this image was not taken in Cambridge. It was taken in Connecticut. And I look to this image as the pivotal image that I would say I started to realize that there was a series here, or that there was a larger body of work that was starting to form. So this was a day that we were in a place called Chatfield Hollow, this beautiful lake where the water, it's got this like brackish reddish tone to it because it's surrounded by pine trees. And at least this is the myth that we were all told growing up here, that because the pine cones have fallen into the water, that the water's got this like red amber glow to it. So it's kind of this fun place to swim in. And Leah and my daughter Apple, still to this day, I don't know what they were talking about, but they were having this really sweet, innocent moment. And I was able to capture it with my camera from the shore. And this is just the moment where I knew there is something really, what I'm capturing here is the intimacy that they had between them. You know, I don't know what they were saying. I don't know how they were communicating, but there's a communion there that was so lovely. And these are the same two girls about a year ago outside of my niece's home. And this was also another image that was taken in the area where I grew up in Connecticut. This one's called the Clinton Motel. And I think I'll stop there because I would imagine that the most interesting way for me to talk about my work is when there's questions. People typically have some interesting questions that they want to know about the girls, their relationships with each other, how the work has changed over time. So I think I'll stop there and let Nico come in now and hopefully can expand on the work a little bit when people ask questions.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. And so I want to remind people that we'd love to hear your questions, and you could start raising your hands at any time. We just won't take the questions until after Nico speaks. And to ask a question, just click the participant button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and you'll see a little button to raise your hand. But please feel free to start raising your hand at any time. Okay, so our final presenter for this afternoon, or this morning, depending on where you're Zooming from, is Nicoló Filippo Rosso, who will discuss his project Exodus, an investigation into the crisis in Venezuela, and a close look at some of the millions who are fleeing their homeland for Colombia and other neighboring countries. Nicoló is an Italian documentary photographer based in Colombia. He graduated with a degree in literature in Torino, Italy. His work is committed to long-term projects, and he works on editorial assignments for clients such as Bloomberg News, The Washington Post, Business Week, Der Spiegel, Sette Corriere, Vice, Haaretz, Il Reportage, and for international NGOs such as AmeriCares, Catholic Relief Services, UNICEF, and UNHCR. Okay, Nico.
Okay, so, well, it's a great pleasure to meet you all. And thank you for the invitation, Glenn. Thank you to Social Documentary Net and Photoville. This project started with frustration because I was asked to work on editorial assignments about the Venezuelan migration in Colombia, and every time there was too little time to explore the problem and to build a narrative. So basically, I just decided to work by myself, and I started spending weeks and months at a time in some of the main border areas and in the capital city, following the migrants. Also, I've been walking from the borders to the main cities along the migration routes that the migrants take, because most of them, they don't have money to reach a major city or the next border by bus. So they just walk. They actually call themselves the walkers. Let me share the screen so maybe I can keep talking while some images move on. Okay, so just to give you a background, the Venezuelan migration after the Syrian migration, it's the biggest movement of people in the world at this moment. We're talking about 4.5 million people who left their country, and almost 2 million people are in Colombia. Then it's very hard to understand numbers because not everyone is registered. Many people enter Colombia through illegal path. So it's very hard to understand how many people we are talking about. I'm talking to you now from La Guajira, which is a peninsula in the northern tip of Colombia, and some of these images have been taken here, which is one of the main entry to Colombia. I decided to work on this story in black and white because, well, in general, I work on black and white for my personal stories, while almost all the assignments are always asked to be in color. But I find that migration is like a human condition of our time. So of course, I'm documenting this specific movement of people, Venezuelan migrants in Colombia, because I'm here. But this is a topic I'm very interested because it's a human condition of our time. People are migrating all over the world, and people are escaping the same problems. I mean, they are escaping wars, they are escaping inequality, they are escaping dictatorships or totalitarian regimes. So this is a way for me to explore this specific migration with the aim to contribute also to the historical memory. So one day maybe we can look back and understand what's going on now. And it's a way also to use this story as a mirror for other migrations. I mentioned the Syrian migration, but there is also the migration from African people to Yemen, for example, or to African people to Europe, from Afghanistan, Iraq. So really, this is for me an opportunity to explore what it means to be forced to leave your country, because you cannot stay there. Like, there's no means to survive if you stay in your country, so you escape. So this is what pushed me to work on this story. Of course, now this migration is being impacted by the pandemic, and actually this pandemic is shifting this movement of people. Like, the migration to Colombia is flipping, because we are talking about two countries that are both suffering of poverty, hunger, inequality. And in Colombia, they could find like a place where to rebuild their life, even if in a very humble way. But people were trying to find a shelter and to work, maybe along the streets, selling coffee, selling candies or whatever, in a day-to-day survival. Now the pandemic and the lockdowns that have been imposed both in Colombia and Venezuela made day-to-day survival impossible. So a lot of people are going back to Venezuela because they say, at least in Venezuela we have a roof, we have a shelter. I see like this migration as like it's like the encounter of two society and two worlds that are both collapsing. Venezuela is collapsing because there is like a political, economic, and social crisis. But Colombia is a very violent country. It's a country where a lot of people are abandoned and struggle to survive. So like Venezuelan migrants enter Colombia, and then most of them try to reach other countries. But what I see is that basically it's just a clash of two, as I said, two collapsing worlds. To mention, like many Venezuelan migrants are pregnant mothers, and they come to Colombia to give birth because the health system is not working anymore in Venezuela, but also in Colombia that's not working very well. So the magnitude of this migration is too big for the Colombian infrastructure to take care of all these people. And I found that it was very interesting to follow this cut of the story. And I'm working now with a Colombian indigenous midwife who helps migrants in migrants camp to give birth, because as they cannot access the Colombian healthcare system, many of them rely on indigenous midwife, and she is the midwife. You are watching her now. And that was important for me to explore also like this solidarity, you know, and this sisterhood, because fortunately there's not a lot of xenophobia or hatred from the Colombian population, and this is very important because that would be a nightmare to handle this big migration with xenophobia, as it happens in Europe, for example. But between Colombians and Venezuela, there is still like a strong brotherhood. So this helped controlling hatred and xenophobia. For me, this was like a different, I had to apply a different approach because as Kristen was mentioning for her story, she knows all the name and who the people she's photographing are. And with the migrants, that's almost impossible because that's like proper of the migration that they move. They are constantly on the move. So sometimes I really like very, very empathic moments with the people. But then it was done because they were moving, I was still there. And of course, sometimes I follow the people I photograph, but most of the time, no, because I'm trying to give a wide picture about what this migration means. So that was hard for me because normally when I work on long-term projects, I'm familiar with the place, I know everybody by name. And for this story, I cannot because they are constantly moving and I'm constantly moving as well. So still it was very challenging to find and to express like the same depth and the same intimacy, even if we were just, you know, like sharing a very short moment. So yeah, I mean, I would also give more space to question and answer, and maybe we can explore a bit more this story, like answering the question, and also maybe we can have a dialogue between us. So Glenn, if you feel like, I think we can just skip to the next part of our conversation.
Okay, well, we've just heard and seen three very different presentations about very different subject matter. And we'd love to hear your questions and comments, either about particular exhibits, particular photographers, or just the general process of photographing today. So please raise your hand because we don't know if you have a question until you do. And again, you could access the raise your hand with the participant button at the bottom of your screen. I'd just like to start out with one question, though, for the panelists. You know, we're at a time right now where there are some unprecedented things going on in the world. The pandemic, climate change, here in the United States, just unprecedented fires and floods, and here a presidential campaign like we've never seen before. I'd just like to ask either the three of you who would ever like to answer this, what's it like now getting out these other stories that are equally important? I mean, last year, the whole world was listening to the story in Venezuela. I don't think people are really listening to it right now. Jason, I think you have a harder story that is probably less in the news. And, you know, Kristen, your work is very different, but the same question. So if anyone would just like to answer what it's like for you to get this work out today with all these other major things going on in the world.
I mean, I'll give it a shot. I think, you know, it's challenging in some ways because a lot of how we get the work out is interacting with people. You know, I have done a lot of presentations at universities and other organizations with this work. But on the other hand, I think people have a little more time and are willing to, or also looking for different news than COVID and the elections and things like that. And so in some ways, I feel like I've been getting a little bit more attention with this work and having a little bit more time to engage people who are interested in it, in conversations around it and that sort of thing. We've also, because a lot of my work is driven by the relationships with the NGOs, we've also had a lot of opportunity to step back and think about what the next steps are. Work on grant funding and work on strategic planning for how we'll, address some of the new and current issues.
Well, that's encouraging to hear.
Yeah, same for me.
Yeah.
Oh, is that okay, Glenn, if I answer too?
Please.
I was just going to say that for me, and I guess for the girls as well, with the onset of George Floyd's death, we were all really in such anguish about everything that was unfolding, and we had to put a hiatus on the work anyway because I didn't have access to the girls because of quarantine. And then, our energies just shifted. So we all started going to protests, and then the younger girls kind of fell off that a bit. It wasn't quite their, purview that just wasn't the way that they were going to express their anxiety that they were feeling. But my oldest niece, Kayla, and I, went out to a lot of protests together and photographed together and met people together and cried together. And it took a while for me to find my way back to photographing the girls just as a unit. I'm not even sure if I'm fully aware of the steps it took before I could kind of allow myself back into that space. Mm-hmm. But for me, so I think you were asking the question from a little bit of a different venue, like how do we share the work, or how were people receiving it,
or is there an appetite for the work now, given, although your work deals with an issue that is really at the center, one of the central issues going on right now about racial justice in the US and recognition of a community that has been under-recognized for 400 years.
Yeah, well, and I would also say that once I started to say okay, we're gonna spend time together with the girls, we're gonna start to get work out, but I really feel like all of us changed since May. We, especially my oldest niece, she really just grew, and she was always somebody who cared about social justice, but she became an activist. Mm. And so within a couple of months, all the girls had even changed. So I was then again challenged to entering their group. How I photograph them now is even different. And it just took a while to go back for my own self to have an appetite to continue the narrative. And I feel like we've all adjusted. We're sort of getting there now, but it's a great question that you just asked.
Okay. All right, let's take some questions from the audience. The first question is by Trey Horvath. And Trey, you'll need to unmute yourself and then just ask the question.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Glenn. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Great. Well, I just want to say beautiful and important, stunning work from all three of the speakers. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. My question is for each of you, Jason, Nicoló, and Kristen. Could you elaborate on how long of a period of time each of your projects spans, and perhaps explain what percentage of your time was spent dedicated to this project versus your other work?
So my project started in 2015 and is ongoing. I've made probably a dozen different trips working on different angles on this, on the story, and each of those are sort of designed around the specific agenda that we were working on at the time, but they all feed into the broad experience that I'm trying to share from that place. Each of those trips are probably close to a month a piece, so I've spent about a year in the field in those jungles photographing.
On my end, I started this project on 2018, so it's 2 years I'm working on these stories. Some of the images were taken during assignments, and others were just part of periods of weeks, sometimes even months, in the field. And then of course, when now I'm at the border in this moment, and I'm talking constantly with all my editors in order to find maybe shorter stories that can also help financially to spend longer a longer time and keep working on my project. But yeah, like in the last 2 years, I've been mainly focused on this project.
Thank you, Trey, for your nice words. I would say that the project I'm probably about 10 years into the project, but I would say I was only aware I was into the project for about the last 7, because some of the earliest images that I've folded into this series, I didn't actually know I was in the middle of a series when I took them, but I went back to archives to see, you know, to see where I was at the beginning.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Trey. We have a question from Francie Scanlon, and again, just unmute yourself and then go ahead and ask the question. Francie, if you're there, you'll need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Yes, to any or all three. What do you believe? What's your takeaway about the most important personal quality you brought to the project that allowed you to connect with the individuals that you represent?
Great question.
Thank you.
I can start, Nico, with that one if it's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I've just learned over time that I have to listen to the girls, and the older they get, the more they demand that of me. And I'll just give you a, you know, in the beginning, we were all spending time together. The girls were little. They were taking baths together. They were running around together. They were having their diapers changed together. They were just always together as a group. It was expected, and it was part of their everyday experience. But they're older now. So my oldest niece is looking at colleges right now. She's in her senior year of high school. Leah just turned 14. My daughter is 13. They're both in 8th grade. And then there's the younger feisty one, Layla, who's in 4th grade now, who you'll all be seeing more of in this series. But recently this summer, as I was just saying to Glenn, like I was trying to get back on track with the series, trying to get back into it. And I was like really desperate for a photo that was gonna really like make my heart sing, you know, like that, where you get that great feeling that you've taken something that's meaningful to you. And I just couldn't get it. And so we were all down at the beach, and I was just, the girls got really mad at me because I was trying to get a good photo and I couldn't get it. So I was interrupting their play. I was interrupting their wanting to go up and get stuff at the snack stand or whatever. And like, eventually they just had to tell me like 2 days later that they were really mad and that they sometimes wished I just didn't take the camera out all the time. And so I'm at a new point with them where I've had, like, what I'm learning is I have to listen to the girls, especially if I want this to be collaborative. And they're telling me that they don't want my camera out all the time. So I put it away, and we've had some fun times without the camera, even though that sometimes kills me, but I leave the camera at home. So thank you.
Thank you for your honesty. Thank you.
Well, since my work is so polar opposite from that, I'll take the next stab at it. My work is almost all developing tropics, so far away. I travel way too much, and a lot of times I'm even working in communities where I can't even speak the language and don't have that kind of communication. So, you know, for me, it's, you know, before the camera goes up, I want to make sure that I understand the issues from the community's perspective, and that I find ways of just seeing them as people, and look for the sort of commonality and familiarity in a situation that is sort of by definition and by design very exotic and foreign. You know, I do try to go back to places a lot. So if there's a community that I can get back to and do follow-up work, I try to do that. And so I start to get to know people a little bit better. And then also I do try to take as long as I can in the field, often adding my own time to assignment time and things like that.
Yeah, I think like working on long-term projects is a lot about passions. Like as Kristen was saying, like sometimes you go out and there's no picture. Okay, it's fine. There's no picture. You learn something else. So I think it's like sometimes documentary photography can go much deeper than anything else because we are forced to learn all the time from everything, you know, like, so you go out, there's no picture today, but maybe you have been talking with the people and you have been, you know, like closer to a situation that then makes you more aware when you have to photograph in another situation. So I would say that passions is one of the main like one of the pillars, and of course empathy, you know, because like sometimes you have time, sometimes you don't, but then you have to understand and to like to learn how to relate with people in an intimate way, you know, like to make people feel comfortable with you. And that is something that that on my perspective it has some magic, you know, because you learn a lot about yourself and you know a lot about the people you want to photograph when there is like this like this tranquility between the photographer and the person that just happen in a short moment, you know. And then I mean for me like photography is a form of protest also. Like Glenn, you were asking before, like how's the state of these kind of projects now that everything is COVID. Like, well, everything is COVID, but so also our projects are in a way or the other related to COVID now. But I mean, that is a form of protest also for me because, okay, I mean, we cannot just keep photographing people with masks, you know, like we have also to put our attention back to big issues that are still going on. And of course they are affected by the pandemic, but still they keep being like a major issue in the world. Like the Venezuelan migration is still the biggest migration after the Syrian in the world. And it's very important to keep documenting that. So for me, it's a form of protest against or with governments and politicians, but also with editors, you know, because hey, there's still this thing going on. Please, please put your eye on this. You know, like it's still important.
Yeah, I'm glad you're still reporting on these important stories. Thank you. All right, we have a few more questions, and I see some questions in the chat. Really, if you'd like to ask a question, we'd love to see you raise your hand and we'll call on you. But the next person with a question is Amy Marquis. And unmute yourself, Amy.
Hey, thanks, Glenn. So I think your work is stunning, all three of you, and I'm always curious to know what the other story is behind the camera. And I've heard little pieces of this from each of you as you've been talking, but I'm so curious, what are the things, like, and I know this is hard to answer, but is there one thing that you're each learning from these projects specifically? I'm so curious what your experience is in this too.
Anybody like to take that?
Glenn, I'm sorry, but I could not hear properly the question. Maybe you can resume it.
Oh no,
Go ahead, Amy. Why don't you ask it again?
Can you? Okay, sorry, my connection is not so good here. I think I'm also, you know, I'm always fascinated by the stories that I see in the frames, but I'm curious to what's unfolding on the makers side. So I'm curious what all three of you have been learning from photographing these people, following these stories, if you can distill it down to one thing that you can share.
Okay.
Who'd like to take that?
I will take that. I think what you're asking, Amy, is like not quite what am I learning, but like what is sort of like what's getting sparked in me or answered for me in the work. I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, that's great. Go with that.
Well, I just recently had this interesting conversation in the car with my oldest niece, and we were talking about how often we are commenting on the part of the work that's about representation. Again, even though I didn't start the work for that reason or through that lens. But we realize, like, we never talk about the fact that it's work that's about about females. You know, I've been following 3 and now 4, the story of 4 connected females who love each other. And I know I don't know why I was surprised to come to that realization, because that's, like, you know, I've always been a feminist and really drawn to anything that's has like a strong feminine energy and power to it. And so it was like a little funny for me to be like, oh yeah, I guess that's what the work is about. So I think the work for me, there's like a quiet reverence in it that I see over time, that I don't necessarily know I'm looking for that, but I see that that's what I settle on and that's what I capture. So it's some sort of like dialogue with myself about that, the power of the feminine energy.
Would anybody else like to take that, or should we just move on?
Well, I have I was inspired by this question because for me, the most important thing I learned from our work is to reflect on our privilege. I mean, we have the privilege of telling a story through a camera, and I think it's very important to share this reflection with the people who see the photographs. You know, like it's about telling a story, but it's also about telling, hey, be aware that you have so many privilege, and there are things that are happening to other people, and there are millions, you know. So yeah, I mean, that is something that I learned personally, and I try to share with the audience.
Yeah, an important point there. Okay, we have a question from Rashad Taylor.
Hey, thank you all. I just want to start out. Thank you all for sharing. Your work is, you know, just wonderful. I guess so. My question is really for Kristen. How you doing?
Hi, Rashad.
So I know I've read about you a little bit, and you talk a little bit about your own childhood and family life. Do you think that, you know, how has your own childhood experience, you think, impacted the series, you know, with your daughter and nieces, and, you know, really just for better or for worse?
That is a beautiful question, my friend, my Instagram friend. Well, listen, I'll just be like totally transparent. I had a very complicated childhood, like lots of trauma, and definitely was just talking about this with a friend who's also on the Zoom today. You know, the feeling of invisibility, right? So to me, it makes a lot of karmic sense that I am completely drawn towards photographing the connection and the love between the young family members. So I would say that, like, trauma led to something beautiful here, and it's probably my own way of, like, you know, trying to work some of that stuff out. But also, you know, I think I'm not particularly traumatized anymore by that. So I think, like, I just I have a reverence for that kind of, like, beautiful connection, and I also want to tell their story. I don't want my daughter or my nieces to ever feel invisible, in the sense of feeling invisible within the family unit, or like in the bigger picture of, like, or feeling invisible because they're girls of color in the world that is not always honoring them. So, is that what you meant?
Yeah, thanks, appreciate it.
All right, thanks for that, Rashad. We have a question from Virginia and Safi.
Hi, I wanted to say, like everyone else, everybody's bodies of work are stunning. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. Kristen, I have a question for you. This is Safi. Hi, Kristen. Now that the girls are at different stages in their maturity, are you finding more challenges in documenting them together, pandemic aside, just because I know there is a gap in age between some of them? What are your challenges now, or are you finding any?
Oh, this is a great question. It's really timely. There are some recent challenges, and I didn't anticipate them, which is also kind of like what led to the frustrating day at the beach. And they are different in terms of like how they want to interact with each other. And I kind of got blindsided by it. I was like, we're all family, we all love each other. And they're you know, they have different friend groups, they have different social interests, lots and lots of them. They're probably touching in every single photograph that I've taken of them that's out there in the world, and connected in some kind of, you know, physical way. And they're not all as comfortable doing that anymore. And so that's another place where I feel like I have to honor I have to listen to them. I have to listen to the fact that maybe their intimacy looks different. It's expressed in a different way. And I think that I'm learning to take a little bit more of a step back to see how they are interacting, and to look for, you know, like to see it through their eyes, and not just sort of like how I used to see their intimacy, you know, expressing itself between each other. And I'm kind of giving you a rambling answer, but it's a very current issue that I am sitting with and learning through. So I feel like in a couple months, I'm gonna be on the other side of this and like understand them a bit better. And also, I would also say that they're like with my daughter and my middle niece, Leah, who are both in 8th grade, they are concerned with other things now. Like none of the girls are concerned with like dating or sidetracked by those types of things that we would often expect to be the thing that sidelines a body of work that has to do about, you know, girls coming of age. It's not that, but it's just like they're more concerned with what they look like or how they're perceived in the world, because they're middle schoolers. So there's a self-consciousness there that didn't used to be there. And then I would say, you know, with my oldest niece, she has stepped into this totally other world, and she's ready to launch. So that also creates, you know, a year from now, she'll be at college, hopefully living in a dorm. So lots of changes. So thank you for asking. I hope I answered your question the right way.
Yes, you did. And just as a quick little follow-up, do you find now that they are more mature and more actively involved that they are also bringing ideas to you for their representation in these images?
I would say that before the pandemic, I was keyed into that, and they were definitely collaborating in a much more vocal way ahead of time, kind of like, oh, you know, how about if I hang out over here, or why don't you get us doing this? And then just like that's couple of months, I don't know, maybe like 4 months where we didn't have access to each other, and how we've all grown through this whole dynamic of what's happening in the world. Now they have ideas, but I think they felt a little shut down because I wasn't listening to them. So it's like I have to look for the nuances of how they're telling me that they want to be photographed now. But yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie.
So we have time for one more question, and I apologize for other people who have their hand raised. But the last question is Tanya Strizu. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, and thank you. I've been a bit late to this meeting. I would like to ask maybe a philosophical question for all three of them. How do you perceive critics who say that photographers would take advantage of vulnerable situations and to show to the big audience? I don't know if it's understandable.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. I think it depends what the photographer is doing with the work. You know, if they're using it for their own benefit, if they're, you know, truly exploiting the subjects, then obviously that's an issue. You know, part of part of what our job as photographers are, at least for the, the documentary and the photojournalistic side of things, is to help get those stories that are, that don't have other good ways of getting out, to help get them out there.
Right.
The reality is too, though, that, more and more subjects are capable of doing their own work as well. And so, with social media, with self-publishing, with any other way that people might want to also tell their own stories. And so, one of the things I've been doing myself is working in participatory photography projects into some of my projects. So if I'm going and photographing a community, then I'm also working with them to help them find ways to tell their own stories as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a really important question. Would anybody else like to address that?
Well, I think Jason really give the reply, but yes, I mean, it depends on what you do with the photographs you make. And often when people are vulnerable, they have no voice. And that's what we try to do. I mean, to
give them the
take
voice.
Photographs to put that vulnerable situation on the eyes of a wide audience, so people can also take responsibility and share responsibility for what's happening to other people. For example, if I do a good job about the Venezuelan migration, and I can have these stories seen like in a deeper way from also governments and organizations, this can help to raise money. This can help international agencies and NGO to raise more money, and they actually did with my photographs. So they can make people more sensitive to a situation, raise money, and try to have more people in the field. I mean, that's the only reason why I do this work. And of course, looking for a good aesthetic is important, because we want you to be aware of things catching your attention, and your attention can be caught when the work is aesthetically good, like that's what a good photo is about for me.
Kristen, you're photographing your own family, so I'm not sure if this applies to you, but unless you want to address it, but if not, that's fine.
Okay, I think I've sort of addressed it by just talking about listening to the girls, making sure they're complicit in their acceptance of what I'm putting out there in the world.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really want to thank everybody. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank Photoville. And what I'd like to do at the end of these Zoom calls is for everybody to unmute themselves and to applaud the panelists. So,
there we go.
And Laura, would you like to say anything last?
Hey, I mean, that was really fantastic. And there was a lot, we're here in the office, actually, I obviously on mute, talking like, a lot of this is such an unnatural way to communicate, but also it's kind of a special way because there's so many of you from all over, so we're all together. So we've been here. It was really a fascinating conversation. So thank you, all four of you. Glenn, you're an excellent moderator, and I love this clapping, this like communal clapping at the end. So thank you. I really encourage all of you. Thanks for joining us. I encourage all of you to check out all of these artists, all of their websites, and follow them on social media. Please look into more of what Social Documentary Network does. SDN, the Zeke Award. It's a really special organization, and Glenn, an amazing person. And we're a Sunday, so we have another few weeks of programming. So please go onto our website, photoville.nyc/sessions, to see all the other talks and workshops we have going on for the next few weeks. It's going to be really fantastic. They are being recorded thanks to our friends at PhotoWIngs, but we really would love for everyone to, log on live. And we also want to thank our friends at the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation for supporting all of our talks and workshops this year. So thank you and happy Sunday. Take care.